Hello, good evening and welcome back to PM Express. We're discussing the nomination of Bank of Ghana Governor Mr. Arthur as Vice Presidential nominee, awaiting approval from Parliament to be confirmed as Vice President of the Republic. You can join us on the show by sending your text to 1760 and facebook.com/multitvghana or on any of our Facebook portals, and we will gladly read your comments and opinions here live on PM Express. So back to the studio, we were discussing really the strengths of Mr. Arthur compared to that of Dr. Bawumia. And I was asking the question whether any of you feel that this is a tactical choice to burst the bubble of the MPP. Let's continue from you, Mr. Pratt.
Well, first of all, I'm not seeing bubbles anywhere, either on the side of the MPP or the NDC. I see national problems which need to be resolved, you know. And for me, the most significant thing about Mr. Kwesi Bekwin and Mr. Arthur is simply the fact that he doesn't get in the way. You know, he's a very quiet person, focuses attention on his job. There are people who even think that he's not particularly articulate and so on. So it would seem to me that one of the considerations simply is to get somebody who is not going to get in the way of the president and who would allow the president's dream to grow, you know, to fester and so on. It would seem to me that this, if that were the case, would reflect a very, very high level of confidence that the president has in his own abilities, you know, to mobilize people, to get votes and so on. And it seems to me that it's also an indication that the president would be asserting his authority and independence. You know, these are the indications for me. I don't particularly think that in choosing Kwesi and Mr. Arthur, the focus was on what Bawumia brings to the MPP ticket. I mean, if you've been listening to many of the people in the NDC, they've very easily dismissed Bawumia as somebody who doesn't present a threat to them at all. You know, and I've seen Bawumia's performances on platforms, and my goodness, it is something. You know, my goodness, it is something. You know. So these are going to be things that we must look out for. His first major outing on the economy, there were near disasters and so on. I mean, for example, when it came to methods for calculating inflation, you know, and we can discuss that in detail and so on. So I don't think that is the issue. I think it has a lot to do with his general disposition. It has a lot to do with what the president wants to do and so on. I think that these are the key factors. Right.
I'll go back onto the phone line before I come to you, Prof, to discuss the constitutional issues. I want to go back to Matthew Opoku-Prempeh. Good evening, sir. Thanks for holding on. Earlier, we wanted to discuss the vetting process. Is this confirmed that indeed, Mr. Arthur will go through parliamentary vetting and approval? Well, I think we lost Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, and if Dr. Jonah is there, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Yes, you had a reaction over the comments you made from Kwesi Pratt. What do you have to say to that? That, I mean, it's unsubstantiated to suggest that the president is weak on economics.
Yeah, I think the word is very, very weak that Kwesi used. These are Kwesi's words, not mine, and I would like to leave it there. As for the suggestion that people have managed economies who didn't have any formal training in economics, it is true. But these are very rare cases. Modern economies are not run by people who are non-economists. And in every modern economy, you always get not only an economist, but somebody who is very experienced in the management of the economy.
But really, Dr. Jodo, must you be an economist to be able to manage a country?
Listen to me. It is true that once in a while, you get somebody like Dr. Kwesi Bekwin, a company lawyer who is able to do very well. In the UK, a classics man, somebody who studied classics, was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he did very, very well. You do get isolated cases like this. But whether you like it or not, in every modern economy, people want to depend upon people who have formal training in economics. And that was the point I wanted to make. The president trained in history, communication, and so on and so forth. So that does not mean that he doesn't know anything about economics. But the point I was making is that he would like to strengthen his economic team by bringing on board somebody whose job all along, from teaching up the way up to the Bank of Ghana, has been in finance and economics. That was the point I wanted to make.
And do you think Emisasa is the right person
I think Akwesi will fit into the bill very, very well. As for not getting in the way of the president, well, it may be a point. We have only 5 months before elections. For me, I think what the president needs is somebody who will focus more on the economics and finance whilst he handles the political dimensions of the business.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jonah. I have Matthew Opoku-Prempeh back online. Good evening, sir, and thanks for coming back online.
Good evening.
Now, let's discuss the vetting process for the Vice President. I know this is the first time that we'll be subjecting a Vice Presidential nominee to vetting and subsequent approval from Parliament. When was this arrived at? When did the House agree that, indeed, when the President nominates a Vice President, he will be vetted?
Parliament, by standing orders and practice, works through its committees. Plenary doesn't work till the committee works on it and submits a report to plenary for plenary to take decisions. So by virtue of the fact that Parliament works through its committees, and if the subject matter is already found in our standing orders, then that committee, that matter will be referred to that committee. Approvals of persons in our standing orders nominated by the President is done by the Appointments Committee of Parliament. So necessarily, since the Constitution says for Parliament approval, then the nominee, when it gets onto the floor of Parliament, Madam Speaker, would necessarily refer to the Appointments Committee. The Appointments Committee has a way it does its things that conforms to the rules and regulations of our standing orders, or the committee has evolved over a period of time. Approval for members of Council of State, or some nominees going onto the Council of State or Supreme Court judges or ministers, and for this matter, the Vice President, is nothing new. It may be the first time a Vice President is being subjected to the approval process of Parliament, but Parliament's approval process is well established. I don't for any moment think that it is different. It is not different. Why do I say it is not different? Vice Presidents are nominated by the leaders of the various parties, the party's presidential candidates, and they go through a vetting process in the EC to make sure that they follow the constitutional dictates. You should not have had a certain imprisonment. You should not have committed certain crimes. You should be eligible as an MP and eligible as a president. So that is what the EC does before the whole of Ghana vets you and puts you through the electoral process. If it has been short-circuited in the sense that you have been appointed by or nominated by a president by virtue of the fact that somebody has died, either the Vice President himself has died and the President is nominating, or the President has died and the Vice President has been moved up, it then comes to Parliament for approval. Normally, when things are being done in the Appointments Committee, the nominee is announced to the whole of Ghana to bring any adverse findings they have against the nominee. I don't think this can be very different because he's going to occupy such a high position that if anything at all, Parliament should be even more stringent on it than even ministers or, for that matter, anybody else.
And has the House been informed, and when is the nominee expected to appear before the vetting committee?
The President's letter has not arrived in the House. Once that letter has arrived in the House, Madam Speaker or whoever is chairing or acts as the Speaker will refer to the Appointments Committee. Then the Appointments Committee, the clerk, will then schedule announcements to be made in the dailies and whatsoever. And then anybody who has any reason why such a person should not occupy the office of the Vice President or a minister or a Supreme Court judge or a member of Council of State, depending upon where he is coming from, the person brings that. The Appointments Committee looks at all these letters, finds complaints people bring, and come to a judgment. We are not only going to go through the basic procedure, we will have to look for the person's suitability as well as eligibility for the post before we come.
When you say suitability and eligibility, is it to suggest that you doubt the suitability and eligibility of the nominee, or this is just standard parliamentary procedures?
We are not talking about doubts here. We are talking about what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that there is an eligibility criteria, and the person must be suitable for the post. That is why Parliament would advertise. That is why it cannot be done in camera. Because appointment committee don't necessarily sit in camera, we sit in public. Because we want people to see this is an elected position. This is a position that a nominated position. You are going to serve all Ghanaians should something happen to the president. And you want us to do it hush-hush. It is not possible to do it hush-hush. It is not possible to do it hush-hush. It is not possible to do a rubber stamp, because it will be a disgrace on Parliament itself if it does that. What about if we rush through and we find out that these were things that we should have done a thorough check on? So I think that when it comes, the nominee would go through how every other nominee has gone through, an even more stringent way than what we have treated ministers and Supreme Court judges and whatsoever.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, MP for Menchia constituency. I have a couple of your messages. This one from Godwin Doche Skaide, who says that good choice, but my only worry is he doesn't bear the name John. Well, that's a bit petty, really, but NDC must select someone who bears the name John. And then Eko Yeboah says that a leader appoints someone whom he knows very well that can cooperate with him to arrive at a destination wanted. The governor is the right person for President Mahama, and Yao Amwako says that God will guide him in his new office. Wow, can this be? He turned the economy down. Look at the economy and our forex exchange and judge for yourself. Wrong choice for NDC. We need a man like Dr. Kwesi Botwe, an economist who has proven track record. This comes from Evans Ferguson. And Kweku Elvis Oliver writes that, well, that's a good choice and hope for Ghana's economy due to the man's sophisticated knowledge on the economy or finance. But is he the best choice? Famous enough to impact on the coming election? Good luck, Mr. Emisa. And Emmanuel Kwame Dapi says that it is too early to criticize. It is a good choice, Richard Awume says. Nice day, Mr. President. And Ania J. Nicholas writes that whoever Mr. President chooses, Ghanaians will vote for them come December. And same Awume says, I love that, Mr. President. Right, so let's come back to the studio and shift gears a bit to talk about the constitutional provisions of Article 60. Now, considering the fact that the Constitution didn't...
Well, I think that we could make comments also on the processes, because some of the things that Matthew has said are not wholly true. You understand? It is true that this public vetting of ministers, nominated ministers, has been used for some time now. But it's also true that there's a Supreme Court decision which says very clearly that parliamentary approval is not synonymous with public vetting. Yeah. You understand? So if we are acting on the side of the law and so on, then it's important that we act on the side of the law. The other thing which is important for me is that we are dealing with a situation which is unprecedented. There's no precedent for the vetting of a vice presidential, nominee by Parliament. And indeed, he also makes the other claim that this is a position which is normally voted for. On the ballot, the vice presidential candidate does not appear on the ballot.
Yes.
You understand? So there's a certain assumption that who becomes vice president is to some extent, and I'm choosing my words very carefully, to some extent, the prerogative of the president. You understand?
That's what the Constitution says.
By inference and so on. To some extent, is the prerogative of the president. Now, I believe that the purpose of having parliamentary approval is to enable Parliament check, first of all, his background, check whether he meets the criteria set out by the laws of Ghana, and so on. That can be done through other means. other than the way in which we vet our ministers and so on, it's important to clarify that Parliament is going to have to make a decision as to how to deal with these matters. And I don't know if Parliament has made
that decision yet.
No, but I don't really see the reason here for departing, for Parliament to depart from the existing practice.
Vetting procedures.
Absolutely not. I don't see the reason why at all. In fact, even though the Vice President is usually not on the ballot, we all know that when you cast a vote for whoever is president on the ballot, that person is coming along with a vice presidential candidate who is known to the public at the time. So when people cast a vote, they may be casting a vote for the person on the ballot, but with a clear awareness of who the vice president will be for that person if that person were elected. So you could, based on that alone, you could argue that, in fact, we do also indirectly vote for a vice president. Each time we vote for a president, we couple it with that vote is coupled with a vote for a vice president. Now, when the vice presidency becomes vacant in a situation such as this, which requires the selection of a vice presidential nominee who has not gone through the electoral mill, so to speak, then you have somebody who has not been tested by the democratic system, by popular election, directly or indirectly at all. Now, for that kind of a person who is nonetheless one step away from the presidency, it is important that they go through a certain test of democratic legitimacy, which is at least the closest we can get to an election, which is go through the people's representative for the first time for them to approve you. Now, the approval, as Kwesi rightly said, is indeed the prerogative of Parliament. The same Supreme Court decision that Kwesi Pratt was talking about also did say, in saying that vetting, approval does not necessarily mean vetting, the court ended up by saying that, in fact, whether or not approval includes vetting or entails vetting is a prerogative of Parliament. So on the basis of that, Parliament decided that, in fact, when we approve, we vet. So in this particular instance, I haven't seen the argument yet. In fact, the argument we made, as indeed Matthew Opoku-Prempeh made it in his comment, the argument could be made that the higher the office, the stronger the case for vetting, especially when the person who is being vetted is not just going to be occupying a position at the pleasure of the president, like a minister who can be reshuffled out anytime, but it actually is going to be a vice president who can immediately step in the shoes of the president when there is a vacancy in the presidency. Such a person who has not been previously been elected directly or indirectly
needs to go through. You're watching PM Express, and we'll take a short commercial break now. You heard Professor Kwesi Prempeh. He's a constitutional analyst. Kwesi Pratt Jr. is also in the studio with us. We're discussing the nomination of Emisa Arthur, the current Bank of Ghana.
When we come back,
when we come back, we'll discuss it further. Stay with us.